In 2015, the price of oil collapsed. Brent crude, which had been trading above $100 a barrel, fell below $35. Saudi Arabia, whose government depended on oil for more than 70% of its revenue, ran a budget deficit of over $98 billion in a single year. Not a rounding error. Nearly 15% of the entire economy gone in 12 months because one commodity changed its price. It wasn't the first time. Between 1980 and 2000, Saudi Arabia ran budget deficits almost every year. By 2000, the national debt had climbed to 100% of GDP. The country that sat on a quarter of the world's proven oil reserves had spent 2 decades borrowing money to survive its dependence on what was underneath it. And the threat was not just cyclical, the price going up and down. It was structural. The world was changing. Electric vehicles were accelerating. Renewable energy was getting cheaper faster than anyone predicted. The long-term trajectory for oil demand was pointing, eventually, in one direction. In 2016, a 30-year-old prince named Mohammed bin Salman presented a plan. He called it Vision 2030. And whatever you think of the man who made it, the plan itself is one of the most ambitious economic transformation programs ever attempted by any government anywhere on Earth. This is the story of what it is, what it's actually achieved, and what it might still fail to do. The story of Saudi Arabia's oil addiction is a story of extraordinary abundance that created an extraordinary vulnerability. Commercial oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia in 1938. By the 1970s, the kingdom was producing close to 10 million barrels per day and sitting atop reserves that would define global energy markets for a century. The wealth that followed was staggering, and it was distributed in a very particular way. The Saudi government essentially created a social contract. Citizens would pay no income tax, receive free education, free healthcare, heavily subsidized electricity and water, and, in many cases, direct cash subsidies. In return, they would accept rule by the House of Saud without parliamentary democracy. The oil state bought loyalty with services, and for decades, when oil prices were high, the arrangement worked. But the structural weakness was always there. When oil prices dropped, there was no other engine to compensate. The non-oil private sector was small, underdeveloped, and heavily dependent on government contracts, meaning it wasn't really independent from oil at all. It was just oil money flowing through a different pipe. By 2015, the diagnosis was undeniable. Saudi Arabia needed oil at roughly $100 a barrel to balance its budget, a break-even price that was increasingly disconnected from what markets were producing. When oil fell to $35, the arithmetic was brutal. The deficit that year was 15% of GDP. That gap between what oil is earning and what the budget needs is the entire reason Vision 2030 exists. Not as an aspiration, as a survival mechanism. When Mohammed bin Salman unveiled Vision 2030 in April 2016, the document was unusually specific. Not a collection of vague aspirations, but a set of measurable targets with deadlines. The kind of document you can, in 2030, hold up against reality and score. The goals were sweeping. Reduce oil's share of government revenue and build non-oil income sources. Increase the private sector's contribution to GDP from 40% to 65%. Create 1.5 million jobs in the private sector. Raise female workforce participation from 17% to 30%. Develop tourism into a major industry, attracting 100 million visitors annually. Build an entertainment sector from essentially nothing. Diversify exports. Develop a domestic defense industry. And do all of it within 14 years. The vehicles for doing this were equally ambitious. A sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund, or PIF, would be grown from $150 billion in assets to over $600 billion, then $1 trillion, investing across global and domestic markets. To generate returns independent of oil, a value-added tax would be introduced for the first time, a radical shift in a country where citizens had paid zero tax on almost everything. Tourist visas, which had previously barely existed for non-religious visitors, would be issued at scale. Women would be given the right to drive, to work, to own businesses without male guardian permission. The scale of the social change embedded in Vision 2030 was as remarkable as the economic targets. Saudi Arabia was not just promising to build new industries, it was promising to build a different kind of society. Nine years in, how is Vision 2030 actually performing? The honest answer is better than many predicted and still short of what was promised, depending on which metric you look at. Start with the wins because they are real and they are significant. Tourism. This is arguably Vision 2030's most visible success story. Saudi Arabia achieved its goal of 100 million annual visitors, years ahead of the 2030 deadline. Foreign visitor arrivals rose from 18 million in 2016 to 30 million in 2024, with foreign tourist spending hitting nearly $40 billion in the year to mid-2025. Tourism produced a balance of payments surplus, meaning inbound tourist spending now exceeds what Saudis spend traveling abroad, a first. The kingdom has set a new target, 150 million visitors by 2030. Female workforce participation. In 2016, 17% of Saudi women were in the formal labor force. By 2024, that figure was 36.2%, exceeding even the revised Vision 2030 target of 35.5%. The change has been rapid and structural. Women can now drive, work without male guardian permission, start businesses, and travel independently. The social transformation underpinning this number is as significant as the number itself. Unemployment. Saudi unemployment fell from 12.3% in 2016 to 7% by Q4 2024, reaching the Vision 2030 target 6 full years ahead of schedule. The Public Investment Fund. PIF assets have more than tripled since 2016, reaching 3.53 trillion Saudi riyals, approximately $941 billion, by end of 2024, approaching the $1 trillion milestone. The fund has invested in everything from Uber and Lucid Motors to domestic megaprojects, generating returns and global investment reach that would have been unimaginable in 2016. Entertainment. Created from almost nothing. Cinemas were banned in Saudi Arabia until 2018. By 2024, Saudi Arabia was one of the fastest-growing film markets on Earth. Riyadh season 2024 drew 19 million visitors. More than 400 entertainment events in 2024 attracted nearly 77 million combined attendees. The money that once left the kingdom when Saudis traveled abroad for concerts and leisure is increasingly staying home. Overall, the 2024 Vision 2030 annual report found 93% of key performance indicators either met, exceeded, or within reach of their targets. Of 1,502 total initiatives launched, 674 had been completed. But a complete picture requires looking at the failures alongside the successes. And there are several that matter. Foreign direct investment. Despite years of promotional effort, FDI in 2024 fell to a 3-year low of $20.7 billion, well below what Vision 2030 had targeted. Saudi Arabia has struggled to convince genuinely independent international businesses to locate operations there, partly because of concerns about the rule of law, partly about bureaucratic complexity, and partly because the private sector still operates substantially in the shadow of state-directed priorities. Non-oil exports. One of Vision 2030's most important structural targets was growing non-oil exports to 35% of non-oil GDP by 2024. The actual figure is 25.2%, still a significant gap. The kingdom has diversified its domestic economy more successfully than it has diversified what it sells to the world. And the fundamental fiscal tension has not been resolved. In fact, it may have worsened. Saudi Arabia's fiscal break-even oil price, the crude price it needs to balance the budget, has risen to roughly $94 to $96 per barrel, partly because Vision 2030 itself is expensive to build. The current oil price is around $65. That gap means Saudi Arabia is running budget deficits, borrowing heavily on international bond markets, and relying on drawdowns from reserves to fund the transformation designed to reduce its dependence on oil. The irony is sharp. The plan to escape oil dependency requires oil revenue to fund its execution, and the oil revenue is not sufficient. In 2025, Saudi Arabia's external borrowing and bond issuance exceeded $37 billion. The approved borrowing plan for 2026 is $57 billion, against an anticipated budget deficit of $44 billion. The kingdom that was once a global lender is now a consistent borrower. One of the least analyzed dimensions of Vision 2030 is arguably its most profound: the social transformation that has happened alongside the economic one. In the space of less than a decade, Saudi Arabia has undergone a social revolution that would have been considered inconceivable even in 2015. The religious police, the Mutawa, who once enforced dress codes and gender separation with legal authority, have been stripped of most of their powers. Women drive, they serve in the military, they attend sporting events, they sit in the same concert audiences as men. They run companies, they hold senior government positions. The entertainment sector, once non-existent, has become a juggernaut of social change. Saudi youth, 70% of the population is under 35, now have concerts, cinemas, comedy shows, sporting events, and a domestic entertainment calendar that reflects a genuine opening of the public sphere. This is not cosmetic. The behavioral changes are real, the cultural shifts are measurable, and the Saudi population's engagement with them is genuine and broad. Whether this social transformation is sufficient to generate the kind of dynamic, knowledge-driven private sector that Vision 2030's economic targets require, entrepreneurial, innovative, globally competitive, is the open question. Opening cinemas is not the same as building industries. Allowing women to work is necessary but not sufficient for creating a workforce that drives GDP independently of oil contracts. With 5 years remaining, the honest verdict on Vision 2030 is this: the social transformation is real and largely irreversible. The economic diversification is real but incomplete. And the core fiscal problem, oil dependency, remains structurally unresolved. Non-oil GDP grew 3.9% in 2024 and 4.9% in early 2025. Genuine, measurable, diversified growth. The private sector's contribution to GDP has reached 47%, ahead of the 2024 target. Tourism, entertainment, and the digital economy are real industries now, not just promotional materials. The social contract has been meaningfully rewritten, but oil still contributes more than 50% of government revenue. The fiscal break-even price is $94 a barrel in a world where oil trades at $65. The foreign direct investment the plan needed to fund itself through private capital has not arrived at the scale required. And the NEOM megaproject, the most audacious symbol of Vision 2030, has been suspended, scaled back, and reframed. That is the central tension of Vision 2030. The plan is real. The ambition is genuine. The achievements are measurable and significant. But the structural cure, a Saudi economy that can sustain itself when oil is at $50 or $30, or when demand structurally declines, has not yet been built. What has been built is a country that looks and feels dramatically different from the one that existed in 2015. A society that has genuinely opened. An economy with new sectors, new industries, new participants. A government that can measure what it's doing and report on it with specificity. Whether that is enough, and whether the remaining 5 years can close the remaining gap, is one of the most consequential economic questions in the world right now. Because if Vision 2030 succeeds, it becomes a model for every resource-dependent nation watching the energy transition approach. And if it doesn't, the consequences will be felt far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Saudi Arabia set out to cure an addiction. 9 years in, it has built a rehabilitation program that is genuinely working, changing behavior, developing alternatives, reducing the symptoms. But the core dependency persists. The oil economy is still underwriting the transformation designed to replace it. The next 5 years will determine whether Vision 2030 becomes the most successful national transformation of the 21st century, or an extraordinarily expensive, genuinely impressive, and ultimately incomplete attempt to outrun the laws of economic gravity. Either way, what's been built already is impossible to ignore. If you found this worth watching, subscribe. See you in the next one.